Okay. So today it's talking about taking information and starting to create a long tail effect for it. So I'm going to structure this with about 10 to 20 minutes of just talking about the space I've been working in and what I've found in my work, and then open it up and have a discussion across everybody else. So my background is in hiring and resumes, but then this maps across all data types. So sometimes I'll talk about what I've found in my research, and then we'll start to talk about how that would map to other services. What I've seen in the travel space is you had Expedia, and then Orbitz came out and took a lot of market share. And then Kayak came out, and they've taken a lot of market share. And what's happening is they, in a lot of businesses, are an overgrown list of something. And it could be a list of plane flights and hotels, or books, or whatever. So most business models are just a list, and a website that's primarily what they do, like Expedia. And then Orbitz tried to become a little bit more intelligent about slicing and dicing the flights to add value. And then Kayak is trying to get a value on top of that by having Ajax and more refined UI. And then Faircast came out. And I don't know if anyone knows about Faircast, but they will do projections on flights and how much they're going to cost over time. And so they're going to estimate if they're going to go up and down in prices. So that way if you say, oh, the price should drop for that flight, then I'll hold and buy that ticket later when it should go down. So they are doing data mining to go add value beyond just, here's a list of flights, you go pick one. And so I see when companies have a list of data, and then you could have a long tail view of it. And traditionally the long tail has been how much is data consumed, or how popular is one piece of data. And I would say that if we can get ranking to be very, very efficient, what's going to bubble up to the top is the data that people find most interesting and relevant, and then high traffic will then map to that data. What I found is if you look at a list of data, you need to first create a projection of what people's needs are, and then you would take that data and find different kinds of projections of what people's needs are, and then that results in long tails that map to their needs. So for example, like often in dating, if you have a list of people who you could date, if somebody is looking for a guy looking for a female that's heavily religious and in a certain age range, then their projection is what their needs are. So then if you look at the people that are available to date, then that shape and the value of how highly they rank is shaped by those needs. And so the person could then order that information based on those needs and start to surf or consume the data in a top-down fashion. And then based on other people's needs, you would then create different projections on your needs and then do that voting. So if people have to either do manual voting to try to create valuations, then you have a huge concern about the cost to do manual voting, either a 5-star rating or comparing two items. If it's, say, completely automated and data mined, like Zillow or Faircast, then it becomes easier, but a little different. So any questions so far before I go to the next area? What I found when we're doing Talent Spring, which is a company for resumes, we want to rank resumes based on how good they are, we had to create a taxonomy. So when it comes into programmers, we would go subdivide those down into maybe language, and then C++, Ruby on Rails. We do it by algorithms. And it'd be security, video, compression, database. And then we would do management. Like team lead, dev manager, and CTO, for example. And so what we would do is we would take resumes that would come in, and then we would say, based on this resume, we think these job categories are a match. And then that creates industry lists, which are these projections. And then with our system, when you upload a resume, then you see two resumes side by side, and you have to vote on if one is better, or if the left one's better or the right one's better, next to a criteria, which in our case would be, let's say, for a dev manager position, which of these two resumes is better. And then that starts to do the bubbling up information that we use in data mine to go create an exact rank list for that category.
Who's voting?
In our case, it's the candidates. So the candidate will go create their resume and then go upload it. So the next thing I was going to talk about is you have to worry about like dig mafia, they call them, the people in dig who try to create a bias on a group of people. So a lot of voting sites to go kind of monitor content, especially news, then if the system is a 1 to 5 star or a dig it up or an arrow up or down, then something you can have those kind of biased. And you need to kind of worry about IP addresses and other things to kind of look for fraud. In our situation, we do a lot of game theory to go weed that out because the people who are submitting the data are heavily biased in the gains they get out of it. So we use game theory to make that kind of hard, kind of intractable for them to go advance themselves. So I'll talk a few minutes by that. And then when we open this up to everybody, we can go into kind of the dig style, where it's very easy, like Netflix. 1 to 5 star, you just cast your vote, and hopefully large numbers of votes will just wash out any bias. Or something like ours, which is more time consuming to see two resumes and to cast a vote, is more time consuming, but you need to have that game theory to make sure the results are correct. I think those are the two models that are starting to work out. So in the 1 to 5 star, I think you just use large numbers of votes and kind of look for patterns to weed them out. For our system, the candidate will see two resumes right and left, and then vote if one is better or the other is better next to a criteria, which is one of these job categories. And I think this scales to other sides like dating, products, and other areas. So in this case, we have someone that uploads their resume, and if they're a development manager, they see two other development managers, and they can vote if one is better than the other. And in our case, we have, if there's two resumes, A and B, we'll have 3 other people cast that same vote on the same pair. So if 3 people vote here, and 1 person votes here, then that person's probably incorrect and biased, and we throw that vote out. And then that lets us result in that ranked list. So what happens here is everybody ends up coming down to a ranking, either the top of the list or down to the bottom. And then they're going to be slotted in somewhere. So what happens with the game theory part of this is if I want to get myself to the top, and I actually belong near the bottom, I need to do mass collusion, where I need to find tons of voters and then talk them into voting to put me above everybody else at their expense. And so once you have to do mass collusion with large numbers and you have to talk them into hurting themselves at your expense, they don't want to do that. And so we give them a very isolated decision to make, and then we have to do lots and lots of math to actually go build up that list. And so that's how we come up with doing something where someone's heavily interested in the outcome, and then we still try to do a lot of work to remove bias.
How does it hurt themselves if they vote another person up?
What happens is we have a big disconnect between here you have to vote on A and B, and over there where you end up ranking the list. And we like that big disconnect because if there's somebody else possibly voting, they see A and B, and you can't control who they're voting on, and that's a big problem for collusion. And then once they cast that vote, so here's an example. Let's say you find B, and they deserve to be up here, and then you want to collude and put them down here artificially. You can't just push everybody down to the bottom, because when you have 2, you're pushing 1 up and 1 down, right? So you can't just try to push everybody down. That won't work. So you need to pick them and place them down here, And what will naturally happen is all the innocent voters will start to cast their votes right around the cluster, right here. And then you'll have a few strays that vote up here and here. And then we go, well, they're outliers, we throw them out because the community is voting right here. So for you to do mass collusion, you have to not just tell people to go vote this person. You can't express a pattern like vote everybody down. You have to say, for B, I want you to rank them down into the 21% range. And then you have to coordinate, push them down, but not too much, so that way you have to get a whole cluster of people right here in order to get that fake vote to stick.
So what do you use in gaming theory on the people who are voting? Because I would think you'd want to eventually gain a pattern of people who seem to be trying to play the game the system. There's patterns which easily could develop, and where you could rank the rankers up and down. What do you do in that for those situations?
In our case, we have a feedback loop, so we do two things. One is we disperse the number of votes. So person 1 casts 12 votes. And then if they have a second person vote overlap here, then they're casting votes like this, and we make sure there's a low overlap of these votes, so there's only one common vote. And then when you have a third person voting, then they're voting off in votes like in some other axis. So by doing this, to actually get everybody to agree on bad votes, you have to do a lot of collusion, a lot of organizing, because the number of people is pretty dispersed. Then you can spot people who are outliers based on good voters, and then you start to have less trust in all of their votes.
Also known as liars.
What's that?
Also known as liars.
Liars, exactly.
Actually, a couple of parts to my question. First one is, how do you decide which resumes you throw up to a person to vote on? The second one is, I can see clearly when you have 1 and 3, it's very clear cut to say this guy goes up, this guy goes down. But say you have 201 votes versus 200, what do you do there? And if it's voting only on 2, it doesn't necessarily always have to be transitive, right? If it's 201, 200, and then these two are 200, 202, but these two, again, don't follow the same pattern, how do you break the rule there?
Yeah. This gets into some implementation detail that people who are going to go develop these systems might care about, so I'll touch a little bit about that. And that is, to do the system normally, it would take 400 votes. So there's a lot of intellectual property to get the number down. And then we do swarming. So that way, normally, if you can go find a cluster that are behaving correctly, and you can identify that, you can reduce the number of votes. And then we find another pattern like this, where people are starting to have a lot of disconnect. Then we swarm more votes there. So we shift votes around in order to get the total votes down. And then what you do there is, if you look at this kind of as a graph theory, and you start to find obvious liars, and then you start to traverse them, and you find the ones where they voted, and the other people are agreeing with them. So if they're actually lying and someone's agreeing with them, you have a red flag on them, and you do a traversal. So you're basically doing a root canal, and you start to swarm votes on the root canal, the bad voters, and then you can confirm your suspicions, and then you flag them as all bad, and then you can kind of root canal and just remove those votes, and everything else is pretty very, very accurate. And so after you're doing the root canal, basically you're casting just enough votes to determine the bad voters, throw them out, and you're edge detecting between the bad voters and then the good voters. And once you do that edge detection, then everything else, you can pretty much say, okay, those are good votes with a minimal use of votes. Go ahead.
Let's say that I'm assuming that if your algorithms are sophisticated enough to pick up that somebody is specifically voting down only developer positions or only some other kind of positions and not being fair everywhere else, as you need to kind of see
so what we do is, like, one lawyer was saying, I have a tiny office, 3 lawyers, and I need an accountant. And she's talking about how hard it was to hire an accountant. So what we do is, with an accountant enters their resume for exact position, a controller, then they're voting on other controllers. And so then that list is all about controllers. So they say 2 resumes, and they say, for a controller, which one of these is better? And so the expertise is mapped to that data. And then the lawyer can come along and say, actually, here's that rank list. I just want to get somebody really good. I'll pay high and get somebody really good, or somebody else wants to kind of go down the list and pay more cost effectively. So we make sure we cluster so that way a controller is not voting on, like a web developer.
So can you speak to the difference? Because I'm having a hard time understanding the value between this as a social research method, which is really what it sounds like it is to me, is that I'm trying to understand how a group feels about a thing.
Yeah. And
the difference between kind of a confidence interval and the value of what we'd be doing with math, pure math.
Yeah.
And using voting to try and do this, because voting to me seems to be kind of a binary, I like it, I don't like it piece, and you're trying to take it and rank with it, which is where I would think you'd normally use a confidence interval to be able to say, I think this is the resume you want, 95%, I'm 95% sure this is the resume you want, plus or minus 3%.
Sure.
And here's the others in the group that one of these 5 are going to be the one you want.
I'll talk about, when I talk at the abstract level across outside of hiring, it becomes really hard to follow. So I'll go do it in hiring and then go kind of abstract. So what's really happening is you have a list of items. Most websites are a list of items, and we're trying to say, since people are going to spend time, they want to start with the most interesting things to their needs, which is a projection. So we want to push up things that are most interesting to them. And that's kind of the pattern of consumers to use. So it's all, whenever you look at the space, you care about what is their need, and so you need to partition it, and that way you can do that. So that's half the battle. In job categories, we found that we create a taxonomy, and we go down to become fine-grained enough that when someone wants a controller, pretty much everybody is kind of controlling it, all the factors are the same. So if somebody wants a RN nurse, we take nurses down to RN nurses, and we say, there's 4 clusters there, and they're going in different career patterns. Then we make 4 sub-patterns under RN nurses to make sure you're comparing apples and apples in that resulting list. So then that's very important that this list feels apples and apples compared to the candidates or the data items going into it, and then the browsers of that. That's part of it. Then the question is, do you do it like automated or do you manual voting? And I found that how you make that decision is, if let's say we take item 1 and item 2, and then they have different properties in here to try to make a differentiation on what's better. If you can do pure math and say, there's just an equation, I take the properties, run them through numerically and determine the better one, then you can do this with data mining and machine learning specifically. That's the way to go. What I found with resumes, the reason I didn't go that route, is that somebody over here would have a security clearance, and over here they would have a master's degree, and then they have some other thing. And so effectively they're saying there's all these data points which are like apples and oranges comparisons, a security clearance versus a master's degree. Which one is better? And the answer is it depends on the job category. So if in some job categories that security clearance is more important, in some it's the master's degree. So we force a human to go look at the long list of things, and they holistically compare apples and oranges and say, well, based on a development manager for website development, the most important thing is these things, and then they say, oh, we'll pick these oranges, they're more important than the apples in this case, and vote better that way. So once you get the taxonomy just right, that they can vote against, then it becomes pretty clear on which one to vote against. Any other questions? So for some things, if I think the bias is less, if someone's self-interest in entering the item and trying to bias it, it's low, then you can use a 5-star rating, and that works for Netflix and Amazon books. And then if you're actually somebody entering their data type about them that they can benefit themselves, then you need to get more sophisticated where the voting process is more isolated with game theory, and you do a lot of work to weed out the bias. I think the whole goal is people who create websites that are just a list and there's no order, the value in that's going to go down because everyone can make those. And the value is take a projection of someone's needs and ranking them by how interesting it is, and then have people surf this way is the way people will go. And I think they're going to be breakout leaders in these categories. Amazon, I think, have effectively done this with books. If you're going to search for a certain kind of startup book on finance and venture capital, you go search there, and then you go look at the 5-star ratings and pick your books that way. Let's see. Any questions? I think at this point we can start to open it up to a roundtable discussion.
Were you going to mention bid in like some of those others?
Sure. I think there's a category of voting which is categorical voting. 1 to 5 star Netflix, like a thumbs up with dig or an up or down vote. Those are fine if you have huge numbers of votes where bias can be naturally kind of weeded out. The other thing that works really well with those is high interest, temporarily high interest. So it's like, what's interesting today on the web? Then they bubble up, and then you just have time push them down. So I think those work really well in the news category. And they're very fast to cast those votes, which is nice. So I think it'll be interesting to find out which of these map really well with that. So like, say, DVDs with Netflix, that works really, really well with 1 to 5 star.
One more question about resumes. Once a resume is created, it's pretty much out of date.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you keep the content relevant in the system? And how do the numbers maintain themselves?
So what we do is we found that the reason we ended up doing this is because employers, they have to hand scan a resume to see if they're good enough to bring in an interview and spend a lot of time on them. And that means they can only do 60 an hour. So the secret we found is employers they look at 180 resumes max, 3 hours, and then they give up. So they're not very fair to the candidates. So what we do is we have our rank list, and then we have people enter their resume and do the voting, and then we have some permission from all these employers to take the top half of resumes, top third or top half, and as soon as they rank in the top half or top third, we can blast email to all these recruiters, and then they can come back and go look at the resume and then push up the demand. So they can push up their salary and push up their the options they have to get jobs. So ours is kind of an actionable thing, like enter your resume, get this accomplished, get what you want out of it, a pay raise or whatever, and then you kind of forget about it until you come back.
How long before they go stale?
I think the question is how stale, because normally it takes them 3 months to build significant accomplishments in their new job. So I think ours is kind of an action based. I want to go get this accomplished. Where some of the 5 stars is more about other kind of media content that you can kind of rate and forget.
Just going back to the big thing. One of the where it helps is if you know what's the interesting news today.
Yep.
But where it completely fails, and which is why I tend to find data very not useful and hardly go there anymore.
Yeah.
Is it's not telling me what's useful to me.
Yeah.
And there, just community voting is as a model, I think just doesn't. It works in some cases, but it's not going to work in enough cases that it's no longer useful. So
I think that comes down to taxonomy. So if you came to a dig and maybe the front page looked like Craigslist and says, what kind of person are you? What are you interested in? And if they're really interested in advertising, say, then they go in that, and then that's a projection. And then the people voting on those stories have the same interests, and their voting aligns, and then that self-feeds.
Because Amazon, that's one thing they do very well with books.
Yeah.
You go on every morning. Most of the time, they kind of know what you're looking for. So the personalization side of it, I think, is pretty critical, at least going forward.
Mm-hmm. And I think Google is doing that here. So this is every web page on the internet, and somebody chucks in a term like I care about Seattle blogging, and then that's a projection, and then they go and then they create that rank list. So effectively, Google is that rank list, and that search term is their criteria.
I would think that from the very first comment, or where you started out with Expedia, orbits to Kayak, that the comments about Dig are very similar. Dig is offering you kind of the Expedia, it's a yay or nay, big or little, and that the next thing to come along, if they can employ technology like you're talking about, to actually give you the granularity of this is, as opposed to this is good or this is bad, this is relevant and why. That's the kind of the next set, which is also the step that as Orbit's kind of resliced the data from Expedia into something that made the data more relevant, Google took the search data from kind of web crawler and Lycos and made it more relevant and made it better. That as people can cut on that there very well could and hopefully should be a news site that will show you what's relevant to you and show me what's relevant to me. And we both be looking at the same site, but we'll be reading different news.
Yeah.
The Google News does that today.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the pattern is either the projection is bad because their interests are different, so you need to improve the projections, whether it's a taxonomy or whatever works in your space, or it might be if it's getting too biased by a mob trying to bias it, then you care more about maybe shifting to a little bit more costly voting system that's more game theory based. So you can almost view it that way of projection, or is it fraud you need to fight, or is it your accuracy?
Is there any value to a social networking dimension or aspect? Like, I mean, I don't see it so much in resumes other than you can say, my friends at Microsoft think these resumes are good.
Yep.
Is it worth looking at that, or is the categorization a much more dominant way?
The amusing thing I found as I kind of built this for my industry is that I didn't need it at all. It was very orthogonal. And on TechCrunch when we launched, people said, "Oh, another social network," and I didn't get that at all. I was kind of laughed at that. I don't see that as being inherent in this unless you're picking some type where maybe that's valuable. So if you end up doing dating and then you end up doing references between people, and then you can do Google style backtrack valuations, then you might get some value out of that.
What do you think about data from other places other than, to mix this in, other than just having users rank things and vote? Can you follow clicks, follow the amount of time that I spend on the page, follow how I go from one piece of the page to clicking the next thing and determining how relevant whatever you're going to show me next is based off the last things I've looked at? Is it possible to get there?
We certainly can, and then for us, if employers are coming along and starring it as their favorite on their favorite list, if they make offers, they want to email the person or set up a phone interview, like all those things can weight up heavily. And so this is another very interesting aspect. We take, in our case, it's a resume. And so people can vary on how good they are at some job. And there's the real world, and then there's resume. And there's a big difference, and it actually works out really well. And so what we tell people is like, do great things in real life, and then just articulate every last little thing about it. And each time you articulate that, that pushes you up from somebody who dropped out of high school and trying to get in your job category today. You're differentiating yourself from that person. So it's all about do real stuff, and then just go articulate it, and then the sum of that automatically floats people up. So I think the articulation becomes kind of a science, and we're a feedback tool to go make that clear.
So how accurate or successful has your game theory model rating gone?
Been. It's interesting that we just launched a couple of weeks ago, so we haven't hit massive scale, but in our simulator, it's completely accurate. And the amazing thing is the amount of cross-indexing, of course. I would say detecting fraud has been simulated and worked out really well. As far as differentiability, I think it gets ranked down to the point where where they start to be, the order is not important, is when they're almost so similar it doesn't matter too much. Does that make sense? So the question is, when you have this ranked list, how many buckets are there of clear difference? And it almost form fits to how differentiated they are. So I think it'll form fit pretty well with that level of accuracy. It's way beyond machine learning, because what we found in the security clearance versus master's degree is which one is more important. It all depends on that job category. So the permutation between two random properties plus a job category, you can't get enough data to go figure that out. It requires humans to say, I know an industry, I know what people need in this industry, and they make that human judgment, and then we capture that, where machine learning could never get as accurate as this. Minus a few stray incorrect votes, maybe.
So I had a quick question. On average, for every resume you submit, how many do you have to evaluate? Because I see, where I'm coming from is, the more sort of taxonomies you have, the more number of comparisons you're going to have to do, which means that as a person, if I'm uploading one resume, I would actually have to evaluate a lot more binary comparisons than I want to.
Yeah. If you upload your resume, we do 12 votes in one job category, and we can make it less in other job categories. And so you tend to upload your resume, and it says, these 9 job categories probably match. Because they're very fine-grained, we match you to a whole bunch. And then you vote on your primary one, and then you decide if you want to vote on the others. Kind of the truth is that we need less than 12 votes, so a lot of times you'll end up getting ranked in other ones over time. You just don't, like, there's extra votes we can reuse by things. And I would say that all the IP that we did is like really tough to do. Like, just like Zillow and Faircast have a pretty hard challenge. This is very non-trivial. So normally it would start off like 400 votes per resume, and getting it down requires a lot of, lots of tricks.
Is it possible this could lead to sort of like resume monocultures where someone will figure out specifically the buzzwords that are good for the particular node that he wants to be in? And then therefore sort of like interesting resumes that fall outside that will never get voted up because they don't fit the pattern that your system seems to be sort of creating.
There's interesting aspects to that. One is people in real life compete on aesthetics of a resume. So we get rid of that by making it more like a LinkedIn kind of resume. And so they're competing only on content, which saves people time from changing font sizes and margins and all that. So that makes the competition more fair and based on merit. That's part of it. And then the second part is if they did really good stuff in real life and didn't articulate it, they can go back and look at the industry and say, who's ranking above me? Oh, they got a high GPA. I got a high GPA, I just didn't write it down. So that's actually very true. and so, yeah, I'll get to the lying part. So on the validata is, there's this feedback loop to keep getting your validated in. So instead of being a resume writing expert, you now get this feedback loop to go get more validated in. The other thing we found is people would write a one-page resume in real life. We let ours grow to 3-4 pages, because what's happening here is the reason you write your resume and chop it off at one page and send it to an employer is they don't have enough time to flip through resumes and give people justice. So with ours, we have a one-pass voting and ranking, and then that becomes an asset. So instead of employers looking at the same bad resume for tons of employers, we now just have a fixed amount to get them ranked. And that keeps the human effort to a fixed cost, and then the employers can then scale up on the benefit. So that lets the resume be longer and benefits people. When it comes to invalid data, we're going to have a system where we send invites to people to say, come in and vouch that this is true or not. So if it's like Joe at hewlettpackard.com, he won't want to put his stamp on there unless he can actually say, I think this is really true. So I think that'll fight the inaccurate data. And then beyond that, it's just kind of it happens in the offline world.
Now, maybe you touched on this before, but I can see where there's a value in this system for the employers, but what's the value for the employee? Why would I want to actually go through this whole process to start with? It sounds like it sounds like you're transferring work from the employer to the employee, to the applicant, not even the employee, but the applicant.
Yep.
Why do I want to do this?
And here's why, is because we call it the resume black hole, which we just mentioned to people, and they, oh yeah, I know what that is. And they send their resume to an employer, and it never gets looked at. And what happens is, Monster has 34 million resumes. And so an employer wants to go find somebody, and when they reduce it down to what they're looking for, an accountant or a programmer, it gets down to about 50,000 resumes. And so employers look through statistically 180 or less, which is 3 hours of intense flipping. And then they look at a random list, and then they walk away. They can't find anybody good enough for the interview, and nobody matches, and they're very unhappy. So by us creating this loop, employers benefit. The reason the candidates benefit is if we push people based on a merit system, people fall where they belong, and then we will get the resumes if they're in the top half. We have permission from and recruiters to go, if somebody ranks in the top half, send them to every recruiter that's signed up, and then they will go look at those resumes because they're at that quality level that they want. So a candidate can go enter their resume in Monster and never get called for 3 months, or they can enter it in ours and get sent to a lot of people who will come back to them, as long as they're a match in what they're both looking for. Does that make sense?
But where's the incentive?
Theoretically.
Where's the incentive for the user to participate in the game?
So one is to get lots of attention back, either to push up their salary or to get into a job promotion. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but people are in throughout their career when they, in high school and leave high school and so on, you might have a sales associate down to a sales trainer, to a sales manager, director of sales, and VP of sales. If somebody is a sales manager and they're really, really good, either they want to stay a sales manager and push up their salary, and so they can go through this process, get sent to a lot of people, get a lot of demand, and then get their salary pushed up, which is good for them. Or if they want to move into the next step up, which is a director of sales, then they can go through this process. So if you think of somebody trying to hire a director of sales, if there's all these sales managers, kind of wannabes to step into that new position, the employer today is like, well, there's too many of them that have never held a job before. I don't want to spend time going through that list. There's too few that would make it. Once you can go create that long tail rank list, and the employer says, great, now I'll be happy to take that risk because I can take 10,000, I can go straight to the top 50 and start to work on moving people into a new job category. So there's lots of benefit from being at the top of the long tail, and we help people get there when it's not fun, when it's a chaotic market. You have to use connections to get your next job.
Let's say I know that I'm mediocre at my profession.
You're what?
Let's say, for example, that I'm considering whether or not to even bother to use the site. And I know that I'm mediocre. Because, there's going to be a distribution, and there will be some excellent people, some really awful people, and,
yeah.
Nice stuff. Anyway, so what's my incentive for using the site if I know that I'm not at the top of my profession? Because I know for a fact, not that this is true, but I know for a fact that there's no point in using it because I will never end up by any stretch of imagination in that top, but why bother? And if I do decide to use it, what's to prevent me from consistently voting for other resumes that I see as mediocre? And so you end up with mediocre resumes coming up. Are you accounting for that at all?
Sure, I'll handle both those. And I want to make sure I'll pick hotels make sure I don't stay completely in resumes. So I'll address that for resumes and then talk about hotels to kind of counterbalance that. I don't want to stay too much in my industry. As far as how people get benefit, if you look at the rank list, and then you look, which is resumes, and then you look at the rank list of employers who are consuming this resume list, what happens is all the employers, for some reason, want the best employees, and all the employees want the best jobs, if you rank the jobs by how good they are. So there's an asymmetry in the marketplace. And this happens across the board. So what happens is, once we can make the employers immediately find the best, and the jobs also, some are way more desirable than the others, and the candidates can now immediately find the others, and now they can have them labeled, and we have a number system, they can open up access to each other. They're now happy because they're getting what today it's chaotic to find. Then they can each set up like a spam bar saying and candidates can say jobs below this level don't interest me, pay reasons or whatever, and employers can say the same thing here. Then they can block out the asymmetric requests. And so once this happens, they can control contact they don't want. And then one tiny notch down happens again, and it happens again. So what we're doing is we're taking an asymmetric market, and we're forcing symmetry and fairness. So that way, if you...
Sort of like a stable marriage problem?
Yeah. So if you take somebody here who maybe they're getting paid below market, they're saying, I've been advancing over the last year, getting better, and I'm still holding this old job that has a lower price and lower challenge level. I've risen in the market, but my job hasn't. Now, it can go match them with people in the market that matches them. Does that make sense? So now, let me translate this into hotels. So now, let's say you have hotels across Hawaii, and then you have some are 1 to 5 star, based on how expensive they are. So the projection is, which section of the island do I want to go stay on? That's one part. And then another one is, what's that combination between how much I'm willing to pay versus how much I'm willing to get? So once you factor location plus pay plus quality, that's your projection. Then you force the long tail, and then so someone says, okay, now with people like me, we need this. Now they can go top down, so what they're now getting is value for what I'm going to pay, I want to get the highest quality in the closest part of the island I want. And they can now look at the fewest number of hotels that are all in that range. And this is another example of an asymmetric market where you have the list of hotels and the people who are trying to find those hotels, and there's the asymmetry comes where some hotels are trying to do a lot of marketing to try to use marketing dollars to try to force themselves to get to the top of the long tail. Because right now the long tail is marketing, and once you make it on merit, then you're forcing symmetry based on merit.
But how would you, I mean, I think there's,
Okay,
definitions of merit also are very, different people define merit differently. So how does that
it all comes back to the projection. So what happens is you end up saying, did I get the projection right on what the browser is looking for? And then the question is it fine-grained enough? Is it matching what they need? So the question is either it matches or it doesn't, and you either make it better or it's coarse-grained to work with the data you have.
So how is it on the employer side? Like, how can a small company get a really top-notch merit on the employee side?
I used to be at a company, and I used to do lots of hiring. I had one point where I had 3 employees, and I had to hire 12. And it took me 18 months to hire them. And it was because it's intractable. So now with an employer, I'm like, I could make this revenue if I had the employees. Now I can find them immediately, and now it's a question if I'm going to pay enough to go get them. So then I'm cashing in what I have on my side, which is, am I going to pay them below market, at market, or above market? Am I going to have a lot of, on my side, to give them company brand, the position really attractive, and everything else I can give them? So you want this almost a stock market on both sides where they're trying to have almost a price plus the rest of the non-price that they can add to the value. And then over here, they're saying, okay, I've worked hard in the real life, now I can cash that in and get the same thing. And so hotels could do the same thing where if a hotel specializes in activities, then when people come in with that projection, then they don't have to go do marketing to try to get that benefit. They'll naturally get that by the matching process. So you've been waiting for a long time, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, you might have already touched on this already, but what if, for example, you're not looking for the best employee? I mean, let's say, I mean, your ranking is basically along the lines of, I only have this amount to pay, so I'm not looking for a top tier in the top half employee. I want someone who is, maybe I can pay below market scale, and I'm willing to get someone who's at the bottom tier. Can I do my query based on that as opposed to give me the best employee?
Yeah, whenever we talk about what we do, people always say, oh, you're talking about the top 5%, and it's really hard for us to come up with that marketing message to say, once you have that list, not everybody focuses on the top 5%. They start to, what happens is, the top 5% can just increase their salary beyond belief.
Right.
And so employers then sit there and say, okay, now let's go down to the pay that we care about and somebody who might be new enough that has the passion for the job, right? Because employers care about, if people are less experienced and they're more passionate about less challenging jobs. And so we have this kind of market making happen, which makes a lot of sense in other evaluation systems. When it comes to resumes, people are kind of very worried about it.
I'll try and talk to asking hotels, but I think because we've been focused on hiring, maybe it makes more sense there.
That's fine.
You've got, you're rating, with hotels, you'd be rating the hotel, and you'd be rating it based off of what the hotel provides you with the data about the hotel. Do you also then, on the flip side, which would be, have the user or have the customer rate the hotel and base their criteria on it, which would be, have the, I mean, really, it seems to me that the data would be more efficient, even in the hiring model, if you have the employers rating the resumes and the employees rating the companies,
Yep.
and then you match them, and you could be telling basically the employer, for the type of employee you want, your company sucks and you need to fix all these HR practices. And for, dude, don't look for a new job, you're getting paid way better than you're ever going to make.
Yeah.
And you can tell people,
Yeah.
giving them that kind of data back and forth.
And we do that for employees of the one that rank companies.
Okay.
So that certainly happens. We found, like I used to be an employer, and I found with employers is they have tons of money and they don't have time. Because every time they hire a recruiter for $40,000 a year, $50,000 a year, whatever it is, they can only look at 180 resumes an hour. So suddenly you have a labor problem. So here, once we shift it to a fixed cost labor on voting and then put the candidates, it becomes more accurate. And actually, recruiters aren't the best at understanding between people. It often is the hiring manager, and the hiring manager probably has the least time among anybody involved, and they're wanting to turn it into a money problem. So within recruiting, it's $400 billion in recruiting, and it's because people are moving jobs so often. So we move it to the candidates who want to spend no money, and we find it's more accurate this way because one employer says, I need to find a graphic artist. And then I wasted a lot of time, and I found there's 5 different categories, and I wasn't in the right category. So now we have the candidates come in and say, for graphic artists, they're saying, hey, there's 5 clusters, people on print, people on web, and these others, Flash, and we're all going in different directions. So once the employer comes in and says, okay, I need somebody on Flash, then they come into that list, and then it is very accurate based on those people.
You take this data and resell it back out to the various groups. I mean, people pay a lot of money for career counseling, and it sounds like you could take a quick scan of a resume and say, if you want to move to the next level, you need to add these 3 skills. Or on the company side, people are always trying to figure out, like eBay has some horrible retention rate, and you can very quickly find out why people don't think eBay is an attractive place to work and tell them. I mean, are you marketing the data that way as well?
As far as we can make plenty of money on just filling positions. Companies get desperate, and they turn to outside firms and pay 20% first-year salary. So that's where our money comes, and it's just insane amounts of money. So we'll just make our money there. All that stuff we can make free, and just pull in more candidates is fine. Let's see. In this case, this stuff it does make less sense for hotels. A lot of the stuff we talked about. But if you look at Google search, here somebody is typing in. Let's say they're looking for Seattle bloggers and podcasts. Then that rank list that comes up, that feedback loop is people clicking, who clicks through and who spends time on the pages and that whole process. Google has ended up doing that, has that feedback loop to do very good projections. Right now, the projections part of the market is very immature. I think we're doing a good job. Google has a good job with their search terms. Netflix, they kind of find clusters of people's behaviors, and I think they find clusters of personality types and map their ratings based on personality types. I think Amazon does some.
Actually, Netflix is running a big contest right now to find a new algorithm because theirs sucks so bad.
Yeah.
That was going to be my question. To what extent are you forging ahead into a new area here, and how many patents have you secured in terms of, do you feel like you're discovering a lot of this stuff on your own, or are there people in academia doing it?
We have 7 patents. I love data mining and messy heuristical problems, and so I think pure academic types avoid messy problems that are heuristical based and human voting based. How much have I gotten from other people? I would say I got almost nothing from academia. I use lots of math, so pure math, that's good. I follow other companies, and so when Dig has successes and problems, or Netflix, or whoever, I start to follow the trends. And once we find is, what are the pains the candidates feel, and what's the pains the employers feel, and start to hit those root causes, then we start to build in pieces that work well. And I think other people are doing the same thing. And actually, like, eHarmony does something somewhat similar, is they kind of find 40 people, and you have to kind of give feedback on those 40 people before I haven't actually used it, but I'm married. But it's I can't say exactly how they use it, but it's what's that?
You can get a better deal, maybe.
Yeah. So I don't know if anyone's ever used it or know how they work, but I think you get it assigned a batch, and then you have to actually take action decisions on those, and then they move you to a new batch. So I find companies is the best way to find successes and what works.
So who writes your algorithms and how do you find them?
I did the first batch. Mine's background's in data mining, and I came from Microsoft doing a lot of stuff there. And then University of Washington, one guy's a PhD in the PhD program, and he decided to leave to join us. Another guy's in the PhD program with an offer for him. And so I find people in certain kinds of people that love this.
Who's funding?
Who's funding us? We started off with self-funding, and we've pulled in angel money. we have enough runway that we're not in a big pressure to finish our Series A or VC round.
Looks like your system is based on experts rating experts like in your field. How does that apply to services where someone's providing you service and you're a customer?
Yeah. So I think we'll have to wrap up here. I think the answer comes down to projections. So when it comes to anything else, it's all projections. And getting that right is the key. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.